Good night, folks. This is the Phantom of the Night. I'd like to take a couple of minutes to speculate about the implications of the Spanish Catalonian independence movement. Now that Catalonia has had its referendum and has declared itself independent, it will be interesting to see what the Spanish government will do, what the Catalonians will do. I think they will continue to take steps toward developing separate public safety, security, and civil administration institutions, which the Spanish government will declare illegal. Next, it will escalate into building a separate currency outside of the euro. What are some possible reactions that the Spanish government can do? Well, the Spanish government could choose to go ahead with an all-out crackdown. They would have to be willing to jump over the international public relations barrier by risking potential bloodshed on a large scale. It would definitely alienate the Spanish government. To what extent would the Catalonian people resist? It depends on how much they have developed independent security systems. It also depends upon the extent to which firearms are available to the general public. It also depends upon to what extent does the Catalonian regional government attempt to seize local state arsenals of arms. I think at that point, by the way, that would be the trigger point by which the Spanish government would seriously consider using military force and potentially going through the fallout of the international public relations fallout of dealing with mass casualties. Once the Catalonians start seizing Spanish military weaponry, just like Fort Sumter in the Civil War. It would be interesting to see to what extent the Spanish army has military facilities in the region. And again, it also depends on to what extent the Catalonian people actually want to go through sustained warfare. The Catalonian resistance would have to consider, if they were to go and initiate a conflict or potentially deal with a conflict initiated by the Spanish government, they would have to consider how are they going to get supplies to keep up their military efforts. They share a border with France, and they have a sea border with the Western Mediterranean. It's very unlikely that the French government would tolerate smuggling of weaponry over the Pyrenees. They could perhaps attempt to secure arms and ammunition through that route, but I would imagine the French would do everything in their power to stop this. The only other source of weaponry would be from the Western Mediterranean, and the Spanish government would quickly put a blockade. So any type of resistance, I think, would definitely not be in the favor of the Catalonians. Most likely way that the Catalonians could survive is if they could encourage other Spanish regions to resist, such as the Basque. The Basques have always had separatist tendencies, although they have chosen to wage their war much like an IRA type of campaign. I get the sense that the Catalonian independence movement enjoys a lot more grassroots support than the Basque movement. So it does have a capability of, it does have a potential of becoming a more traditional war. But again, they are not in a very strong strategic position to secure supply lines and a source of weaponry like the Russian Ukrainians in eastern Ukraine, right up against the so-called motherland of Russia. They're not in that position. So a war, at least a conventional war, would be rather suicidal. If the Spanish authorities did manage to overrun and create a bloody mess, well, the Catalonians could choose to resist through a continued guerrilla war. In which case it would be a rather messy, long war of attrition. Again, the Catalonians could try to encourage other regions to separate, such as the Basque, in order to perhaps relieve some pressure, military pressure, from the Spanish authorities, the Spanish government. Would have a significant impact on tourism, and it would not surprise me if the separatists would actually try to target the tourists, or at least the more radical elements of the separatist movement, try to target Spanish tourism. A major portion of the French-Spanish border would be effectively militarized, creating economic disruption. The European Union would definitely be pro-Spanish government, simply because it is likely that the Catalonian region would reject the use of the euro, and their concern is that other regions throughout Europe could consider doing what Catalonia did, which is break away and not use the euro anymore. Some other regions in Europe that could potentially break away, following the Catalonian example, would be northern Italy. Could also be Germany's Bavaria region in southern Germany, and the Croatian region of Bosnia. I do not think that the Bavarians would be likely to utilize violence. I think the most likely case where there could be violence would be with the Bosnian Croats. Italy would be a major concern for the European Union, as well as Italy, simply because that region too would also probably advocate rejection of the euro. I wonder if the Italian government would be able to exert enough force to regain control over the northern regions of Italy. As it stands right now, the Italian government is tolerating some level of autonomous sentiment within the region of Italy. The deal is, from my understanding, as long as that region, as long as the provinces in northern Italy maintain a balanced budget, the Italian government will tolerate greater autonomy for those regions. However, I believe that following Catalonia, this will eventually expand to all-out separatism. It will remain to be seen how these various movements develop, how these individual countries that are affected by these movements will respond, and what the EU's reaction will be, especially if these regional separatist movements reject the use of the euro. Anyways, this is Phantom of the Night, and I wish you all a good morning.